Let's travel back to December 2025. It was a moment when India's biggest airline, IndiGo, suffered a complete and total collapse. And look, this wasn't just about some delayed flights. We're talking about a system-wide failure that literally brought the country to a standstill. So how on earth did this happen? Well, we're about to break it all down.
You know, this crisis wasn't about statistics at first. It was about people. And this quote from a bride stranded on what should have been the happiest day of her life, it just perfectly captures the devastating human cost. December in India is peak wedding season. And for thousands, this meltdown twisted moments of pure joy into absolute chaos.
Okay, to really get a handle on this, let's start with a really simple analogy. Picture a schoolgirl, Ria, having an epically bad morning. Not just one thing, but everything that could possibly go wrong does, and she misses her final exam. Now just scale that up. IndiGo's crisis was Ria's bad day, but on a massive national scale where every single point of failure decided to happen at the exact same time.
All right, so let's start with the people who were right there in the middle of it all. Before we get into all the technical stuff, you've got to understand the real-world impact this had on hundreds of thousands of individuals.
And the stories, man, they were just heartbreaking. You had brides who had to postpone their weddings, costing their families lakhs, students who missed exams that would decide their futures, business deals just gone. And then you hear stories like Ananya's, a mom stuck for 12 hours with a sick baby, with no food, no water, no help. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a full-blown humanitarian crisis playing out on airport floors.
So the big question is, how did one of the most efficient airlines in the world just completely fall apart? This is where we need to look at the anatomy of this meltdown and see how a few seemingly small cracks in the system snowballed into an unstoppable avalanche.
The first piece of the puzzle was something called FDTL. It stands for Flight Duty Time Limitations. Basically, it's a safety rule to stop pilots from getting too tired. Now, a new, much stricter government rule kicked in, and it slashed the number of night landings a pilot could do. Great for safety, right? For sure. The problem was, IndiGo hadn't hired enough backup pilots to actually follow the new rule, and that one thing became the first major crack in the entire system.
The second factor was AOG, which stands for Aircraft on Ground. This is every airline's worst nightmare. Right when this crisis hit, IndiGo had between 40 and 45 planes, a huge chunk of its fleet, just sitting on the tarmac grounded. Why? Because of ongoing problems with their Pratt & Whitney engines. And to make matters worse, a global parts shortage meant they couldn't get fixed. So the airline was already fighting with one hand tied behind its back.
And here you can really see the dominoes start to fall. First, you have the engine failures, which meant fewer planes. Then, the new FDTL rules meant you had fewer crews for the planes that could fly. This insane pressure just completely broke the airline's scheduling software. And then, the final predictable domino, winter fog in Delhi. That combination was absolutely lethal, and it led to a total network collapse.
This chart, wow, it just lays it all bare. Look at this. In September 2024, IndiGo was world-class, 90% on time. By November, you can see it slipping. But then look at December 4th, 2025. It just nosedives to an unbelievable 8.5%. That means more than 9 out of every 10 flights were either late or just canceled. The system was completely and utterly broken.
Okay, let's talk numbers because the sheer scale of this chaos, it's just staggering. The data really helps you understand how massive this catastrophe truly was.
On just one day, December 4th, IndiGo canceled 550 flights. To put that in perspective, that was the single worst day of operations in the airline's entire 2-decade history. Just an unprecedented failure.
And the next day, it actually got worse. Over 1,600 cancellations, leaving an estimated 288,000 people stranded. That's like the entire population of a city like Chandigarh, just stuck at an airport on the same day. Incredible.
In the financial cost? On that one day alone, December 5th, the airline lost an estimated 299 crore rupees. That's about 35 million US dollars. We're talking lost ticket sales, mandatory refunds, hotel rooms for passengers, just a breathtaking financial hemorrhage.
So, who was to blame for this national disaster? Was it all on the airline for just not being ready? Or did the government regulator, the DGCA, totally miscalculate the impact of its new safety rule? This, my friends, is where the story gets really complicated. So here's the heart of the issue, right? You've got a regulator who is focused on safety no matter the cost, and an airline that's focused on efficiency no matter the cost. The government brings in this strict new rule right before the busiest travel season, which also happens to be fog season. Meanwhile, the airline, already crippled by grounded planes, had zero buffer to handle it. So who's really responsible here?
This timeline just reveals how fast everything came crashing down. On Monday, performance is already bad. By Wednesday, it's the worst day in the company's history. By Thursday, the government has to step in. And then on Friday, the regulator grants the exact same temporary exemption that IndiGo had been begging for months. It shows just how poorly timed that new rule really was.
So what's the final verdict? Well, most analysts agree that the blame is shared, kind of like you see here. The regulator, DGCA, gets about 40% of the blame for forcing this rule through without really thinking about the ripple effects. But the majority of the blame, a full 60%, has to fall on IndiGo. They knew this was coming for months, but instead of preparing, they just lobbied against it and hoped it would go away.
So, after all that, what's the big lesson we can take away from this incredible meltdown? Well, it all boils down to one thing: the true price of being unprepared.
This comparison is it's so telling. IndiGo could have proactively spent about 70 crore rupees to build a buffer, hire more crew, maybe trim the schedule a little. Instead, by waiting and reacting to the crisis, the actual cost was over 600 crore rupees. A small, proactive investment versus a massive, reactive catastrophe. It seems so obvious in hindsight, doesn't it?
And this is the core takeaway. This is the big so what. IndiGo's system was an absolute marvel of efficiency, fine-tuned to run at 100% with absolutely no fat. But that also meant it had zero resilience. There was no cushion, no buffer for totally predictable problems, engine issues, new rules, even just bad weather. And when a few of those predictable problems hit all at once, that hyper-efficient system turned out to be incredibly fragile.
So we'll leave you with this question. The IndiGo crisis is a really powerful case study, and not just for airlines. It applies to any complex system. In business, in tech, maybe even in our own lives. In a world that is constantly pushing us to be more and more efficient, what's the hidden and often catastrophic cost of having no margin for error? What is the true cost of being unprepared?